At 11 seconds after takeoff, everything went wrong. The engine lost power, altitude vanished, and a split-second decision turned deadly. What followed wasn't just a tragic crash. It was a haunting example of one of aviation's most feared mistakes: the impossible turn. Today, we break down the Greg Biffle plane crash update and uncover how a single choice sealed a fatal outcome. The moment the wheels left the runway, no one knew they were watching the beginning of a tragedy. The aircraft climbed into the sky, engines roaring, everything appearing normal until it wasn't. Just seconds after takeoff, a sudden loss of power shattered calm. In aviation, those first moments after liftoff are the most unforgiving. There is no altitude to trade for time, no margin for hesitation, only instinct, training, and a rapidly shrinking window to survive. Inside the cockpit, alarms blared and muscle memory kicked in. The ground below was rushing closer, faster than the mind could process. For any pilot, this is the nightmare scenario, the one they rehearse endlessly in simulators, yet pray they will never face in real life. And in that instant, a critical decision had to be made: land straight ahead or turn back. To someone watching from the outside, the choice seems obvious. The runway is right there. Just turn around. Just go back. But aviation doesn't obey instinct, it obeys physics. And physics is ruthless. This is where the story takes its darkest turn. The maneuver attempted next is known among pilots as the impossible turn. It's the reflex to bank hard and aim for the runway behind you after an engine failure shortly after takeoff. The name itself is a warning, because what looks possible from the ground becomes deadly in the air. As the aircraft began its turn, precious airspeed bled away. Every degree of bank increased the stall speed. The plane wasn't just turning, it was falling. Gravity was winning. The runway that once felt close was now an illusion, slipping farther out of reach with every second. Witnesses later described seeing the aircraft tilt sharply, struggling, almost fighting the sky itself. To them, it may have looked like an attempt at control, but inside the cockpit, the truth was far more terrifying. The controls were losing effectiveness. The wing was nearing its critical angle of attack. And once that threshold is crossed, there is no recovery at that altitude. The aircraft stalled. In aviation, a stall isn't about engines, it's about airflow. The wings simply stop flying. The nose drops, the aircraft rolls, and without enough height, there's nothing a pilot can do. The descent becomes inevitable. The impact came moments later. When investigators arrived, they didn't just see wreckage. They saw a familiar pattern, one that has repeated itself countless times in aviation history. A low-altitude engine failure. A desperate turn back to the runway. A stall. A fatal outcome. And that's what makes this story so haunting. Because this wasn't recklessness. It wasn't arrogance. It was human nature. The impossible turn preys on instinct, the deeply rooted belief that returning to safety is always the right answer. But pilots are taught over and over again that after takeoff, the runway behind you no longer exists. What exists is only what's ahead. Fields, roads, open terrain. Anything that allows the aircraft to remain under control. Yet in the heat of the moment, with adrenaline surging and seconds ticking away, the mind doesn't think in procedures, it thinks in hope. Hope that the plane will make it. Hope that the runway is close enough. Hope that this time will be different. It almost never is. Aviation experts later emphasize that attempting the impossible turn requires a very specific set of conditions: sufficient altitude, proper airspeed, minimal bank angle, and immediate execution. Even then, success is rare. Most general aviation aircraft simply don't have performance to make it back safely. That's why this tragedy resonates so deeply within the aviation community, because it reinforces a lesson written in blood. Control the aircraft first always. A crash under control is survivable. A stall is not. For the audience watching the story unfold, the question lingers painfully in the air. What if the decision had been different? What if the aircraft had continued straight ahead? What if instinct had been overridden by training? We'll never know. But what we do know is that this accident serves as a stark reminder not just for pilots, but for anyone that sometimes the most dangerous decision is the one that feels right. And in the next part of this story, we'll break down exactly why the impossible turn continues to claim lives, what pilots are taught to do instead, and how understanding these moments can prevent the next tragedy before it happens. Because in aviation, knowledge isn't just power, it's survival. Long after the wreckage was cleared, the silence remained. Not the kind of silence that follows an accident, but the heavy, unsettling quiet that lingers when questions refuse to fade. For those who knew Greg Biffle, the loss wasn't just a headline or an investigation report. It was a life interrupted, a voice gone, a future erased in seconds. And for the aviation community, the crash struck a nerve that runs deep. Every pilot remembers their first instructor drilling the same warning into their head. If the engine fails after takeoff, do not turn back. Those words echo in hangars, classrooms, and cockpits across the world. Yet despite the warnings, despite decades of data, pilots still attempt the impossible turn. Not because they are careless, but because they are human. When the engine goes silent, time fractures. Seconds stretch into eternity. The mind races faster than the aircraft itself. In that chaos, training and instinct collide. One says fly the plane forward. The other screams to go back to undo what's happening. And regret has never waited for permission. Investigators later reconstructed the final moments with brutal precision. The flight path told a story the pilot could not. A shallow climb, a sudden bank, a tightening turn, airspeed dropping below safe limits. The data didn't accuse, it simply revealed. This was a battle against physics that no amount of experience could win. What makes this loss especially painful is how close safety truly was. Not behind the aircraft, but ahead. A survivable landing was possible. Not clean, not graceful, but survivable. And in aviation, survival is everything. Yet hindsight is merciless. From the comfort of the ground, decisions seem obvious. From inside a failing cockpit, they are anything but. That's why these stories matter. Because they force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Knowledge alone is not enough. Training must override instinct, especially when fear takes control. For families, that truth offers little comfort. They don't analyze flight data or debate aerodynamics. They remember phone calls that will never come. Empty seats. Conversations frozen in time. A goodbye that never had the chance to exist. And that's the real weight of the story. Every aviation accident is more than metal and numbers. It's birthdays missed, plans unfinished, dreams grounded forever. The impossible turn doesn't just take aircraft, it takes futures. Still, within this loss lies a responsibility. Pilots listening to this story will recognize themselves in those moments. The climb, the failure, the impossible choice. And if the story stays with them, if it changes, even one reaction when the engine coughs and the runway disappears behind them, then this tragedy carries meaning beyond the wreckage. Because the goal of telling this story isn't fear. It's awareness. The sky is unforgiving, but it is fair. It rewards preparation and punishes hesitation. It doesn't bend to hope, panic, or second chances. Only to physics and to the choices made in the narrowest margins of time. And perhaps the hardest lesson of all is this. Sometimes, the safest way forward is the one that feels the most wrong. In the final part, we'll confront the hard truths, what pilots are trained to do in these moments, how altitude illusions deceive even experienced aviators, and why remembering this story could one day save a life. Because the next time an engine goes silent after takeoff, there won't be time to think, only time to choose. Some accidents fade into statistics. This one must not, because the impossible turn isn't just an aviation mistake, tease a human one. A moment where fear outruns physics and instinct overpowers training. And once that line is crossed, the sky offers no forgiveness. Remember this story when the engine goes quiet. Remember it when the runway slips behind you. Remember that control is life and hesitation is loss. The aircraft doesn't care what feels right. It only responds to what is right. And sometimes the bravest decision a pilot can make is not turning back,